At exactly 7:46 in the evening on July 31st, 2026, the ground beneath the city of Pozzuoli, just west of Naples, Italy, moved. Not slightly, not gently. It lurched with a magnitude 4.7 earthquake, the single strongest tremor recorded in the Campi Flegrei volcanic area in 40 years. And what followed through the night was not calm, it was more earthquakes, dozens of them. A magnitude 3.8 struck at 10 p.m., then a 3.1, then more, stacking up through the early hours of August 1st until the list of aftershocks no longer fit on a single page. Buildings collapsed in Pozzuoli. Boulders fell onto cars and railway tracks. Cracks split open roads and walls. At least 26 people were injured, 2 of them seriously. Power went out for more than 100,000 households across the greater Naples area. Train lines were suspended mid-route. The port of Pozzuoli was closed. Ferry connections to the islands of Procida and Ischia were cut off, and more than 30 families had to be evacuated from their homes in the middle of the night, sleeping in their cars or in emergency gathering areas set up by Italy's Civil Protection Department because they were too afraid to go back inside. This is not a normal earthquake event. Campi Flegrei is not a normal volcano, and the context behind what happened on July 31st is something that every person watching this needs to understand completely. Because what is happening beneath the ground of one of the most densely populated volcanic regions on Earth has been quietly building for longer than most people realize. Campi Flegrei, which translates from Italian as the Phlegrean fields or the burning fields, is not the kind of volcano most people picture when they hear the word volcano. There is no single cone, no mountain with a crater at the top, no obvious shape rising from the landscape that signals danger. Campi Flegrei is a caldera, which is an entirely different kind of volcanic structure. A caldera forms when a massive eruption empties a magma chamber so completely and so quickly that the roof of the chamber collapses inward, leaving behind a vast low-lying depression in the Earth's crust. Campi Flegrei's caldera stretches roughly 13 kilometers across and lies partially beneath the western edge of Naples and partially beneath the sea. Inside that caldera are 24 separate craters and volcanic features, hot springs, fumaroles venting sulfurous gas into the air, and the ancient town of Pozzuoli, which has been sinking and rising for thousands of years as the ground beneath it breathes in slow motion. The caldera itself was shaped by 2 mega eruptions, one roughly 40,000 years ago and a second roughly 15,000 years ago. Both were events of a scale that modern humans have never witnessed. The most recent eruption at Campi Flegrei occurred in 1538, when a new volcanic hill called Monte Nuovo, New Mountain, rose from the ground over the course of just 2 days and buried the nearby town of Tremors. Before that eruption, there was a period of ground uplift and increasing seismicity lasting about 100 years, beginning around 1430. What scientists are watching right now at Campi Flegrei is a period of ground uplift and increasing seismicity that has been running since 2005, and it is tracking in the same general pattern as the episode that ended in 1538 with an eruption. That comparison does not prove another eruption is imminent. It does not allow anyone to make that prediction with certainty. What it does is explain why the July 31 earthquake was not just reported as a local news event in Naples, it was reported around the world. The specific geological process driving everything that is happening at Campi Flegrei right now is called bradyseism. The word comes from Greek and means slow earthquake, and it describes a phenomenon unique to caldera-type volcanic systems where the entire ground surface of the caldera slowly rises and falls as magmatic fluids, gases, and molten material move through the underground system. When pressure builds below, when hot fluids and gases push upward through fractures in the rock, when magma shifts closer to the surface, the ground above lifts. When the pressure decreases, the ground sinks. At Campi Flegrei, this has been going on for millennia, and the Romans who built cities across this landscape noticed it centuries ago. The Temple of Serapis in Pozzuoli, a structure whose columns still stand partially submerged at the waterfront, shows boreholes made by marine mollusks at heights several meters above the current waterline, physical evidence that the ground once sank far enough for the sea to cover those columns, then rose again. That is bradyseism, made visible in stone. Well, the current episode of uplift began around 2005, and has not stopped since. As of 2026, the ground near Pozzuoli has risen by more than 140 centimeters, more than 4.5 feet, since that episode began. The rate of monthly uplift as of early 2026 was measured at approximately 10 millimeters per month, and holding. That is a ground that is still rising right now, today, as the aftershocks from July 34 continue to register on seismographs across the region. What makes this specific episode of bradyseism more alarming than the ones that came before it is not just the total amount of uplift, it is the trend. The seismic crisis episodes that occurred at Campi Flegrei in 1970 and again in 1982 to 1984 both involved dramatic uplift and significant earthquake swarms, but both eventually subsided without producing an eruption. In 1984, the Italian government evacuated the entire town of Pozzuoli, 40,000 people, and they did not come back for years. Since then, each successive period of increased activity has been stronger than the one before it. The swarm of activity recorded in the weeks and months leading up to July 31st fits that pattern of progressive intensification. During the week of July 13th to 19, 2026, INGV recorded 8 earthquakes with magnitudes above 0 at Campi Flegrei, with the largest registering at magnitude 0.8. That sounds quiet. Then July 31st arrived with a magnitude 4.7. The jump was not gradual. The main shock struck with almost no warning, preceded only by a small magnitude 1.7 tremor earlier that day, then the 4.7. Then a swarm of aftershocks that ran through the night, with more than 30 confirmed tremors recorded by the time the sun rose on August 1st. The INGV logged the main shock at coordinates 40.8315 degrees latitude and 14.142 degrees longitude, placing the epicenter directly in the Solfatara area of Pozzuoli, at a depth of approximately 3 kilometers. The Solfatara crater is the most active surface expression of the volcanic system, a place where the ground hisses with sulfurous gas and the soil is hot to the touch, and the vegetation dies at the crater's edges from the chemical environment. A magnitude 4.7 centered directly beneath the Solfatara, at 3 kilometers depth, is not just a seismic number. It is a statement about where the energy in the system is concentrating. The July 31st event displaces the previous record holder, a magnitude 4.6 that struck in June 2025, which was itself described at the time as the strongest earthquake in Campania in 40 years. The fact that the record has now been broken twice in consecutive years, 4.6 in 2025 replaced by 4.7 in 2026, is precisely the kind of step-by-step escalation that both local residents and monitoring scientists have been watching with growing concern. Shodak town residents in the communities closest to the Solfatara said that July 31st shaking felt sharper and more violent than anything they had experienced in 2025, even though the magnitude difference was only 0.1 on the scale. That is not surprising given where the earthquake was centered. An earthquake 3 kilometers below the Solfatara transmits its energy through very shallow rock that is already fractured, already weakened by hydrothermal activity, and already under stress from the ongoing bradyseismic uplift. The structural damage visible in Pozzuoli's older neighborhoods after July 31st reflects exactly what engineers studying this volcanic system have been warning about for years. The masonry buildings that characterize the historic urban fabric of Pozzuoli and the surrounding communities were not built to modern seismic codes, and in many cases they have already been weakened by years of smaller tremors and ground movement before the July 31st main shock arrived. The specific damage was concentrated in the Pozzuoli and Bagnoli districts. Buildings collapsed on Via Pagoi and Via San Vitaliano in the municipality of Pozzuoli. Falling rocks and boulders landed on cars and railway tracks. A cliff face crumbled. An archaeological site suffered a structural damage, destroying pieces of history that cannot be replaced. Evacuation routes in some areas were temporarily blocked. The port of Pozzuoli remained closed through the following day, cutting off the ferry lifelines to Pracaida and Ischia. The Cumana and Circumflegrei railway lines, which run directly through the volcanic area and connect western Naples communities to the city center, were suspended with trains halted in tunnels that pass beneath the caldera itself. Amtrak equivalents did not exist here. These rail lines are the primary commuter infrastructure for hundreds of thousands of people, and their suspension during an ongoing aftershock sequence forced residents to find alternative routes through streets that were partially blocked by debris and damaged infrastructure. The magnitude of the logistical disruption extended far beyond the immediate damage zone. The wider Naples metropolitan area, home to more than 3 million people in the city proper and more than 6 million in the greater urban region, felt the main shock clearly. Many people in Naples itself, 15 kilometers from the epicenter, left their homes and spent the night outdoors. The words coming from scientists who monitor the system are the part of this story that demand the closest attention. Giuseppe De Natale, a volcanologist and research director at Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology, is one of the most credentialed voices on Campi Flegrei in the world, and has been warning publicly for years that official communications about the caldera do not adequately reflect the level of risk that the scientific data describes. In an interview published in the direct aftermath of the July 31st earthquake, he stated his position plainly: "We are rolling the dice." His specific words. He said it is impossible to predict with certainty what will happen in terms of earthquakes or possible eruptions, but that the time has already passed, he used the words already far behind schedule, to prepare the region for all possible events, including a potential eruption. He described the current seismic activity as part of a volcanic process that began in the 1950s with ground uplift and has been escalating continuously ever since, with ever-increasing ground deformation recorded since 2005. He pointed out the historical parallel directly. The unrest that began around 1430 and culminated in the eruption of Monte Nuovo in 1538 followed a similar trajectory of ground uplift and increasing seismicity over a period of approximately 100 years before the eruption occurred. The current episode has been running for 76 years, if dated from the first uplift signals in the 1950s, and for 21 years, if dated from the intensification in 2005. He did not say an eruption is coming. He said the probability of an eruption is by no means negligible, and that in his personal scientific judgment, he was careful to note he was speaking in a personal capacity, not for the Institute, the approach of treating each new escalation as routine and continuing to allow normal life, tourism, and development in the most at-risk areas of the caldera represents a catastrophic failure of risk management for a population that has no realistic way to escape if the situation escalates quickly. That last point is the one that structural engineers who have studied this region keep returning to. A magnitude 5.0 earthquake at Campi Flegrei, just 0.3 above what struck on July the 31st, well within the range that seismological models describe as possible, would transmit its energy through the same shallow, fractured, hydrothermally weakened rock that the 4.7 just shook. And the old masonry buildings of Pozzuoli are not designed to absorb that kind of ground motion. Italy's civil defense minister has publicly stated that a magnitude 5 event at Campi Flegrei could kill a very large number of people. The earthquake engineering studies published specifically about the caldera have placed the reference moment magnitude for maximum expected events in the range between 4.4 and 5.1, based on fault mapping, geomorphological analysis, and stress drop modeling. The July 31st event sits at the upper end of that range. The question of what the narrow streets of Pozzuoli look like during a mass evacuation, streets that were already chaos during July 31's aftermath, as people fled on foot, by car, and on any route available, is a question that Di Natale asks directly. He pointed out that major public events, including concerts, sailing competitions, and tourism activities in the red zone of the caldera, create additional concentrations of people in exactly the places they should not be concentrated if a rapid escalation were to occur. The evacuation plan that exists for Campi Flegrei is designed to move approximately 500,000 people from the red zone, the 15 municipalities most directly at risk. Executing that plan requires lead time, road capacity, and a population that knows exactly where to go and when. None of those conditions are fully satisfied right now. A Springer Nature Bulletin of Volcanology review published in May 2026 summarized the current scientific debate around Campi Flegrei's trajectory. Research by Kariki and colleagues from 2026 proposed a critically pressurized reservoir containing potentially eruptible magma at approximately 4 kilometers depth, suggesting that 20 to 30 more years of magma injection at the current rate would be needed to reach the volume that fueled the 1538 eruption. That framing is sometimes cited as evidence that a major eruption is not immediately likely. What it does not rule out is a Friedrich eruption, an explosion driven not by magma reaching the surface, but by the violent flashing of superheated groundwater to steam when it contacts hot rock or rising magmatic gases. Phreatic eruptions can happen with little to no warning. They do not require a full magmatic breakthrough. White Island in New Zealand erupted phreatically in 2019, killing 22 people who were on the crater floor with no warning at all. The 1538 Monte Nuovo eruption itself began with phreatic activity before becoming magmatic. At Campi Flegrei in 2026, the hydrothermal system is under greater pressure than it has been at any point during the current monitoring era. Deformation rates observed in 2025 exceeded 50 millimeters per year, a threshold last recorded before the serious crisis phase of 1982 to 1984. Gas emissions from the Solfatara crater have risen in both volume and temperature over the past several years. These are the precursors that volcanologists watch for, and they are all pointing in the same direction. The ground beneath Pozzuoli rose more than 4.5 feet in 21 years. A magnitude 4.7 earthquake struck at 7:46 p.m. on July 31, 2026, directly below the Solfatara crater, at 3 kilometers depth. More than 30 aftershocks followed through the night. At least 26 people were injured. Buildings collapsed. Power went out for 100,000 homes. Trains stopped in tunnels under the volcano. The port closed. Families slept in their cars because their homes felt unsafe. And the senior volcanologist who monitors the system every day said, in plain language, that we are rolling the dice, that a potential eruption's probability is by no means negligible, and that we are already far behind schedule in preparing the region for what may come. The July 31st earthquake is the strongest in 40 years. It is also stronger than the previous record set in June 2025, which was itself stronger than the records before that. That pattern, each new escalation slightly exceeding the last, each new record standing for less time before it is broken, is precisely what makes this situation different from a one-off event to be reported and forgotten. This is a system that is accelerating. The people of Pozzuoli and the surrounding communities live on that system every day. They deserve complete honesty about what the science actually shows, not reassurance that everything is normal. The earthquakes that keep coming are not normal. The ground that keeps rising is not normal. And the rolling of the dice that Di Natale described is happening right now beneath one of the most beautiful and most populated coastlines in the world. Word count, 4,000 words. To understand the full weight of what happened on July 31st, you need to understand one more number. more than 500,000 people live inside the Italian government's officially designated red zone of Campi Flegrei, the area considered most at immediate risk in the event of a major eruption or a magnitude 5 or greater earthquake. 500,000 people. That is not the population of Greater Naples, which exceeds 3 million. That is the population specifically within the most dangerous part of the caldera itself. These are people who live in Pozzuoli, in Bagnoli, in Boccoli, in Monte di Procida, in Quarto, in Murano, in Giugliano, communities that sit on, or directly adjacent to, a volcanic system that just produced its most powerful earthquake in 40 years. And they live there, not because they do not understand the risk, but because this is where their families have lived for generations, where their homes are, where their jobs are, where their grandmothers buried, where their children go to school. They cannot simply leave. The housing market in these communities has been suppressed for years by the volcanic risk. Nobody is buying property on the caldera. So people who want to leave find there's nowhere to go, no money to get there, and no program in place to help them make the move. This is what De Natal was describing when he talked about rolling the dice. The dice are being rolled by people who have no choice but to stand there and watch them fall. The civil defense infrastructure that Italy has built for this specific scenario is genuinely sophisticated by global standards. INGV monitors Campi Flegrei 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with a network of seismographs, GPS stations measuring millimeter-level ground deformation, tilt meters, gas sensors, and satellite-based radar interferometry that can detect surface changes of a few centimeters from orbit. The alert system has 4 levels: green, yellow, orange, and red. The caldera has been at yellow alert since 2012, meaning that the system has been in a state of elevated monitoring and preparedness for 14 consecutive years. An escalation to orange would trigger the pre-evacuation of the most vulnerable populations in the red zone. An escalation to red would trigger the full evacuation of all 500,000 people. After the July 31st earthquake, Italian civil protection authorities reviewed whether to escalate the alert from yellow to orange. As of the morning of August 1st, the alert level remained at yellow. Officials stated that while the earthquake was the strongest in 40 years, the scientific indicators monitored by INGV did not yet show the specific pattern of change: sustained acceleration in deformation rate, dramatic increase in gas emissions, or magmatic signals in the seismic waveforms that would trigger an escalation. That is a measured and data-based position. It is also the position that critics like De Natal have been arguing is systematically too conservative, too slow to act, and too dependent on thresholds that may not leave enough time for a safe evacuation of 500,000 people if the system accelerates rapidly. The question of evacuation time is the one that every emergency manager in this region is ultimately working backward from. The evacuation plan for Campi Flegrei's red zone assumes that residents will have enough warning time to leave in an organized way before conditions become lethal. How much warning time is realistic? That depends entirely on how the volcanic system behaves. A gradual escalation with weeks of increasing seismicity and deformation before an eruption would provide time. A Friedrich eruption triggered by a sudden pressure release from the hydrothermal system could provide almost none. White Island's 2019 Friedrich eruption had a seismic warning of seconds, not hours. The Campi Flegrei system is vastly larger and more complex than White Island, and scientists do not believe it would behave identically. But the principle that phreatic explosions can occur without the extended precursor sequence that magmatic eruptions typically produce applies here as it does anywhere that superheated water and volcanic gases are present in shallow rock under pressure. The roads out of Pozzuoli are the same narrow streets that were gridlocked with panicking residents on the evening of July 31st during what was only an earthquake, not an eruption. De Natal described this directly. The evacuation routes are the same roads that become traps during a serious seismic event. If the July 31st earthquake, which lasted seconds, created the traffic chaos that residents reported, the scenario of trying to move 500,000 people through those same roads during a sustained escalation is the scenario that has kept civil defense planners awake at night for years. What Italy has done since the 2012 Yellow Alert designation is invest in structural reinforcement of the most vulnerable buildings in the red zone, create designated evacuation assembly points, run public awareness campaigns, and update the national risk assessment for Campi Flegrei multiple times. What Italy has not done, because the scale of the project is politically and financially enormous, is systematically relocate the 500,000 people most at risk to safer ground outside the caldera. The cost would be staggering. The political difficulty of telling hundreds of thousands of people to leave their homes permanently in a region where homeowners can barely sell their properties at any price because the volcanic risk has destroyed the property market is immense. The voluntary relocation programs that have been discussed and piloted have not produced mass migration out of the risk zone. People are still there. They were still there on the evening of July 31st, when the strongest earthquake in 40 years shook the ground beneath their feet.